Hello and welcome back to the AVIAtest weekly webinar. I'm Jeff and I'm very happy to be your host tonight. Thank you again for being with us tonight. I see that our audience figures are rising every week, and that's really a big thank you for all of you. It's really a pleasure to be here with you tonight, and I hope that anywhere you are in the world, you are safe, sound and healthy. Okay, so tonight, before we start, last week we had a little furry guest that some of you asked me about. And that would be our dog Bobby. He's our foster dog, and maybe he will again show up tonight. We'll see if he's in the mood to come and say hi. Okay, so we'll start talking tonight about the communication at uncontrolled aerodromes. I have received a few questions again. Once more, thank you for that. And we'll start by talking a little bit about the general rules and common usage of radio telephony at uncontrolled aerodromes. Alright. So I know that all of you are coming from very various backgrounds, and it's of course depending on where you started flying, depending on where you learned to fly, your usage of radio telephony will be very different. Right? As an air traffic controller, I've had that experience, that first-hand experience, that your whole career as a pilot is somehow influenced by where you started training. As a general rule, people who started flying at an uncontrolled aerodrome are much more comfortable working at an uncontrolled aerodrome for the rest of their career. Whilst if you started training at a controlled aerodrome, it's the other way around. Now, for all of you, because we have pilots from very various backgrounds, so we'll try and keep this as general as possible. We're going to first get into introducing the service that we receive both at controlled and uncontrolled aerodromes. Alright. The service you receive at an aerodrome depends on the classification of airspace where you're actually flying. In fact, it doesn't depend on the aerodrome itself, it depends on the airspace. So, the subject for tonight, being at an uncontrolled aerodrome, is in fact a small language shortcut, because what actually will happen is that you will be flying in uncontrolled airspace. So, we all know that the level of service we receive depends on the class of airspace in which we're flying. For example, if we're flying in the class Bravo airspace, we know that we do receive from air traffic controllers a full separation service, which means that, of course, we're still supposed to look outside the window as much as possible. Please don't forget that wherever you are, however you fly, if you have a chance to look out the window, please do it. Not only air traffic controllers are not machines, and sometimes mistakes can happen, I'm not saying the contrary, but also there may be things flying around you without even the controller knowing. Even if you're controlled airspace, even if you're in a class Alpha airspace, there may still be people who infringe that airspace and who may come in conflict with you without the controller knowing, because for all you know, the infringing traffic may not have a transponder. So let's just make that clear from the beginning, that wherever you are, we look outside the window if our flight path seems to be clear all the way. Now, if you're flying IMC, if you're deep in the cloud, of course, it doesn't really apply, but alright, that's another question really. Now, this being said, if you're in a controlled airspace, if you're in class Bravo airspace, for example, well, you will receive a separation service from the controller, but once we start going to other classes of airspace, like Charlie or Delta, then the service quickly disappears. And it means that as a VFR flight, you are supposed to maintain your own separation from the rest of the traffic. Okay. On top of that, as we want to be starting today, I would like to talk to you about flying in class Golf or class Foxtrot airspace, although class Foxtrot almost doesn't exist at all. It's a very, very rare class of airspace. If it exists anywhere, maybe there are still a few MATs in Britain, but most of all, uncontrolled airspace will mean class Golf. In class Golf airspace, you are supposed to maintain your own separation at all times. What's even more important is that other aircraft, or you also, do not need to maintain a continuous watch on the frequency. So I know that you're the best pilot in the world, and that I'm sure you do pay attention to what's going on the radio. But just be aware that there may be other aircraft who, for example, are not equipped with the radio. That's a possibility. So it's important to realize that wherever you are, in uncontrolled airspace, there may be people flying around you about whom you haven't heard anything. And please don't forget that, because listening to the radio is of course a must. Is of course something you should do whenever you have a chance. But it gives you also a feeling of safety that it sometimes may be overstated, maybe giving you a little bit of a false feeling of safety, because you think that by listening to the radio you know everything, your situational awareness is at its best. Well, it's dangerous to believe that. So just try to stay alert that there may be people flying around you without a radio at all, and that you may have traffic around which you won't hear on the radio. Alright. So back to our subject of the day, communication at uncontrolled aerodromes. What is very important is that the very, very first thing is very important. The ground personnel at the aerodrome is not supposed to give you instructions or clearances. That is very, very important. And even if they do so, because I know that it can be quite misleading, it can also give quite a false feeling to the ground operator, if there is one, that because you're sitting with the radio in your hand at the aerodrome, sometimes it's very tempting to tell the pilot, report leaving the area, report on final. Okay, I know that it's tempting, but it's something that ground operators are not allowed to do. This is very important. Asking a pilot to report something is an instruction. And if you are not an air traffic controller, if you don't have an air traffic controller's license, you're not allowed to give instruction to pilots. That is very, very important. So for you pilots who now are flying at a small uncontrolled aerodrome where somebody on the ground tells you report final, well, okay, they're not allowed to do it, but it's maybe not the best place or time to start discussing what's right or what's wrong. Okay? As a general rule, if as a pilot you hear something on the radio that you're not happy about, unless you're in grave and critical danger immediately, like imminently, don't start arguing on a frequency. Alright? This being said, because somebody gives you an instruction, or sometimes they will even go that far as to give you a clearance on the ground or in the air, if you're at an uncontrolled aerodrome, that is just void, that is worth nothing, and that does not protect you from anything. So because somebody tells you to report final, if you're at an uncontrolled aerodrome, that does not relieve you from the obligation that you have to maintain your own visual separation from the rest of the traffic. Okay, now this being said, let's talk a little bit about how we should interact once we're on the frequency of an uncontrolled aerodrome. We have to make a distinction here between whether there is somebody on the ground with a radio who's giving information, or there isn't. If there's somebody on the ground and that lady or gentleman is handing out information, once again, this is purely information and it should not be taken for granted. If somebody on the ground tells you runway 17 in use, okay, that's what the aerodrome has decided at the moment. Okay, that's how they're operating, that's how most probably, and here it's very important when I say that, hear it again, most probably the other aircraft are using runway 17 or whatever it is. But that does not prevent you from choosing another runway. If you want runway 35, or if there is even another one, as a pilot in command, you are the final authority as to the safety of your flight. If you feel that there is a safer option for you, by all means you should take it. It also means that you will have to say that you're taking another option. Please don't forget that. If you're taking another option than the one that's being offered, or the one that's being told to you, don't forget to say, no, I'm not taking runway 17, I'm taking another one, I'm taking runway 35. This is very, very important because the rest of the traffic has to know as well. Okay. It's the same for example, the weather information or the QNH. Alright? If somebody who's not a meteorologist gives you information, meteo information, the rule is that they should, in theory, tell you this observation is not official. It's not been made by an accredited meteorological observer. Or if they are, then it's okay. But most of the time, at an uncontrolled aerodrome, you will not have official meteorological information. And that information should be passed to you. If you're being given a QNH, for example, please cross-check that once you set it on the altimeter, the readout, the altitude readout that you have corresponds with the airfield elevation that's written on the chart. That's also quite important. The advantage of having somebody on the ground that gives information is, of course, that you know to whom you're talking. And in general, if that's the case, the person on the ground will be the one who uses the call sign of the aerodrome all the time. But that doesn't deprive you from doing the same. If you're at an uncontrolled aerodrome, I would definitely recommend that whether there is a person on the ground or not, you use the aerodrome call sign every single time. Okay? Let's imagine that we're flying at a small aerodrome called Sandown. Okay? Every transmission that I'm going to make as a pilot will be Sundown Radio, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, and then I'll pass the information I have to pass. Alright? Why do I ask you to do this? It's because in some places, the same frequency is in use by multiple aerodromes, which sometimes may be even close enough to catch the transmissions which are meant for another aerodrome. And don't forget that when you're talking to a frequency that's been used by other pilots as well, aircraft in the air will catch your transmissions from much farther than the ground. So it means that even if you think that you're out of range of the second aerodrome that uses the same frequency, well, other pilots flying at that second aerodrome will still hear you. And it can be quite disruptive, because imagine that you're flying somewhere and you just entered downwind and you hear somebody on the frequency saying Golf X-ray Victor Yankee Zulu, downwind, runway 35. And you look in front of you because you said, oh my, there's somebody else, there's somebody in downwind. Where are they? Oh my, I don't see them. This is really weird, because they just called on the radio. What's going on, you know? And in fact, there's a small aerodrome about 50 miles away from you with the same runway number, and somebody is flying there on the same frequency, because it's a common frequency for both aerodromes. It is why I'm insisting that when you fly at an uncontrolled aerodrome, you always use the call sign of the aerodrome. So if you say sundown radio Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, downwind runway 35, there is absolutely no risk of confusion, because then the pilots at the other airfield will hear that you're not calling them, you're not calling, you're not important for their traffic, for their information, for their situational awareness. All right? This is really, really important. Now, the basic rule when you're flying at an uncontrolled aerodrome is that since there is nobody to tell you what to do, nobody is there to tell you, to give you instructions, you are the one who will say what you are intending to do, what you want to do. For example, let's imagine that you're at the holding point of runway 35, or the runway has changed. It's now runway 35. You're at the holding point, and okay, the run-up has been done, the pre-departure checks have been done. Okay, so what are we going to do now? Well, line up and take off. First thing, you look out the window. Okay, nobody's flying, nobody's on final. Alright, so there is room for me to depart now. There's room for me to line up on the runway now. So the first thing you look, you see that you can do it, you take microphone, you push the push to talk, and announce Golf Alpha or sundown radio Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta lining up runway 35. So that all the other pilots around you in the circuit, here, there, on downwind, on final, or not on final because you just looked and there's nobody, or on crosswind, or somebody approaching like 5 miles over there, they hear what you're doing. That's called self-information. That's how they will hear that somebody's entering the runway, and that if somebody's on downwind at the moment, they say, okay, so I have to wait until the gentleman who just announced lineup has taken off before I turn base. That's pretty good sense, actually. So when you do something, you first look, you call, you announce your intention, and then you do it. Same goes for takeoff, same goes when you're entering the area, when you're joining the circuit, when you're vacating a runway, when you're starting taxi, when you're anything that you do, before you do it, you say it, okay? So look, say, and then do. Alright, that's the basic philosophy behind how you want to work the radio at an uncontrolled aerodrome. Now, of course, I just talked to you about manned frequency. So the frequency where somebody is sitting on the ground, and one of my colleagues and good friends is actually doing that in a small aerodrome close to where I used to work, close to where we used to work. And I think if he's watching, he will recognize himself. If somebody's working there, but it's not an AVIS, it's not an Aerodrome Flight Information Service, it's again nothing completely official. It's nothing official as far as air traffic services are concerned. So it means that the person on the ground, as I told you, will tell you, okay, at the moment we're using this runway, this is what we estimate to be a correct QNH. And basically that's pretty much it. What is important is that if on the chart it says AVIS, then we're stepping into another world of possibilities. It's another style of air traffic services. There are actually air traffic services in this case. Somebody who has a license to do so, somebody who went through actual CAA sanctioned training, so somebody who took an exam for it, somebody who has a license, is working there. It's a job, and they are providing you with information on which you can actually rely. AVIS operators will also be able to give you a hand with things like flight planning, for example. If you need to close a flight plan or open a flight plan, if you need to make changes, these people will be there for that. They can also relay your queries or your information to traffic controllers in the area, for example. They could call the Flight Information Center. They can even call the tower controllers at a nearby airport to say, oh, by the way, this aircraft just took off and he's coming to you, and I'm activating the flight plan. So people will know in advance, thanks to the people working at AVIS. Okay. So, to sum up everything, what is important here? We have an aerodrome where the frequency is not manned, first case. In this case, you talk to the other pilots, basically. You're telling the other pilots, here's where I am, here's what I'm doing, and the other pilots will rely on that information to make their flights safer, basically, to fly according to what you are doing. And you, in return, will also listen to the other pilots and continue your flight in accordance to what you hear. Second situation, an aerodrome where somebody is sitting on the ground with a radio, providing you with, let's call it, unofficial information. In that case, you will now receive information about things like the aerodrome condition or the traffic pattern to be used, the runway news, etc., etc. But you are still pretty much on your own, and you should still rely on what you hear from the other pilots to plan your flight accordingly. Third situation, which will be the AVIS. Well, in that case, you will receive official flight information service from the ground, and on top of that, people can help you with small things like flight planning and coordination, things like that. Okay, so I hope this is being clear for everyone. But before we switch to the questions, I will once again insist that whatever information you receive, that doesn't prevent you from keeping your own separation, looking outside, and stay alert to all the traffic around you. Okay? Never forget that unless you're in a radio mandatory zone, people can show up without a radio and show up in front of you, basically, without any warning. So please be aware that aircraft without radios may be in close proximity to you. Okay, we'll never insist on that enough. Okay, so let's go now to the user questions. The first question comes from Belgium, from Dominic, who is one of our most assiduous viewers. Dominic is asking us, could you please, let me take a look at the exact question that was asked. Okay, so Dominic, yeah, blah, blah, all right. Okay, so Dominic is asking us if we could clarify the overall situations that you may encounter at an uncontrolled aerodrome. AVIS or air-to-ground are mentioned on aerodrome visual charts, but behind the abbreviations, the expected aerodrome service provided is quite different. Indeed, that's what I just explained. And we should indeed, as Dominic points out, keep in mind that the vicinity of these class Golf locations are also sometimes shared by ELP and non-ELP pilots due to the variety of traffic. For example, paragliders or ULMs or parachute jumpers or gliders. Alright? So, not only will you find aircraft flying without a radio, but also you may encounter people flying that are not able to speak English or are not licensed to do so. Okay? So keep a sharp lookout, and as we have very often encountered in our career at AVIAtest, during all the exam sessions that we've organized for pilots to come and take their SCL 055 or their ELP, their IKO English exam, it's been very clear to us that for non-professional pilots, sometimes the fact of switching to English is already quite a big job. It requires a lot of brain power, and we're very sympathetic to that. And on top of that, people still have to fly an airplane. I have first-hand experience of being inside an airplane where the pilot had to fight with the weather, had to fight with staying away from terrain, and then a controller called, or actually the flight information service called to pass information. Well, believe me that even though that pilot was completely fluent in English and has a level 6 English rating as far as I know, well, when you're already busy flying an airplane, talking sometimes requires a lot of thought. Okay. I hope that the stream is still up, because I have, yeah, okay, it looks like it's back on. So, what I'm saying here is that it's sometimes very demanding in terms of brain power to speak English on the radio. Just be sympathetic to that as well. And when you're flying, again, keep a sharp lookout, because even if you receive the best air traffic control service possible, sometimes things can happen and people will just be in your way. Alright? Okay. Okay. The next question is coming from Turkey, from Ahmed, who also asked us a question already. And Ahmed is asking us, As an uncontrolled aerodrome, I have been faced with people upset that I wouldn't follow a standard traffic pattern, although I had announced my intention to do so. Am I in the wrong to do that? Well, Ahmed, let me put your mind at ease immediately. No, you are completely right. It's an uncontrolled aerodrome, and as long as you announce your intentions, as long as you announce what you're doing, it's okay. You don't have to fly a standard traffic pattern. You can even take the opposite runway, for example, as long as you say it. So if you announced that you were doing a right-hand pattern instead of a left-hand pattern, it's perfectly okay. It's your right to do that. Okay, and as a general rule, of course, there may be local flying restrictions, and maybe something is written on the chart that because of noise abatement you can't do it, or, okay, I'm not talking about that. If there are no further restrictions, as long as you say that you're flying a right-hand pattern instead of a left one, it's completely okay. Alright. Okay, so that sums up the webinar for today. I hope that everybody had a sufficient throughput, and I have now a couple of good news. We're being installed with a better quality connection in the coming days, so hopefully next week we will get a much clearer stream. And also, since the health situation is not exactly resolved at the moment, and more importantly because we see that we have a lot of viewers and we receive a lot of encouragements from many parts of the world, I would like to thank people from Slovakia, from Belgium, from Spain. I think we even have viewers in Turkey, in the United States, which is quite far, and I'm thanking these people for watching that on a Sunday morning. Thank you everybody for watching. We'll be back next week with more, and the good news is that we will continue doing these webinars as far as we can, and until further notice. Even if the lockdown in your country or in ours comes to a close, well, we have decided to continue with the webinars further than that. All that's left for me to do is to remind you that somewhere here should be a button to subscribe. Don't hesitate to subscribe so that you're being kept in the loop of what we're doing. You can also subscribe to our to our Facebook page, AVIAtest, and as well there you will see that there are things moving and something new is going to come up. For those of you who took a course with us, we'll be happy to provide with a distance learning system, but more to come on the Facebook page. Thank you once again for watching. Stay safe, stay healthy wherever you are. Don't go out more than absolutely necessary. And until next week, my friends, have a nice week. Bye-bye.